religious groups and spiritual organizations are proto-network states, and that once they digitize and connect onto the Web3 in an intimate environment, they will also be able to achieve some of the diplomatic recognition that they may have lacked, that Balaji's network state proposes is coming. Noting that some of those religious organizations already do have, UN observer status. For example, I believe it's the Knights Order of Malta. There's a couple of others out there as well. So there are examples of literal, actual religious organizations who have gone through all the steps that Balaji suggests and gotten UN recognition. They just did it pre-technology. So yes, I would think that that is a great lesson to learn for network states, is that a successful network state or coordination um, is going to have a unifying set of beliefs or spiritual values or mission or passion or core identity that is going to bring it together. And I don't think that freedom or economic freedom is enough, because almost anyone with money basically has economic freedom already. They can buy passports, they can set up companies in the Cayman Islands and other tax havens. And they can switch countries that they live in relatively easy. So there's freedom expanding in what I see happening in the network state movement. But again, it's making that possible for more people. But really, it's how do you spread that all the way down and give everyone the advantages?
Interesting. Then, how do we communicate that message? How do we even align on that? What I'm hearing, you're speaking about values, culture, you're speaking about something that deeply connects us, and we only can really recognize it in each other when we spend time with each other. So, how do we unite on that?
I think that's a fantastic question. I think what we're seeing right now is an emergence of dozens and dozens of network state movements of varying different stripes and sizes and shapes. We've got a vegan network state. We've got cabin network state around co-living and creating the right communities. There's so many different experiments going on. What I'm going to suggest is ultimately, when we fast forward a decade or a third, 10 decades into the future, the most successful of those network states is going to be the one that has the most unifying set of values and the most unifying message. So right now I see tons of, fragmented experiments all over. I'm going to suggest those will converge into somewhat of a universal. But again, I don't know how that, now we're just speculating. My message today is, I think anyone who cares about coordinations and the future of governance and the future of the world and is in this space having these conversations should spend more time thinking about how to make them work at the bottom of the pyramid. Now, if you've never interacted at the bottom of the pyramid, how do you do that? Well, my only suggestion, the only way to learn how the bottom of the pyramid works is to live in the bottom of the pyramid. There is no other way. If you visit the bottom of the pyramid, then you're only observing. You're still an outsider. I was gifted with this amazing gift 17 years ago when my company sent me to the Philippines, and I found community for the first time. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen going to the Philippines. I was born in Ontario to my mom was a single mom growing up. She didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was a nerd's nerd. Like, I got my first computer at 5 years old, 35 years ago. I was early into like IRC and, I'm a nerd's nerd. As a kid, I didn't know what community was. I went to the Philippines 17 years ago and I was shocked with just everything about the Philippines. I learned what real community meant. So and I spent out of the last 17 years, I spent more than a decade in the Philippines and the other 7 years in similar countries around the developing world. And I've been gifted with just so many learning experience from those at the bottom about how to do community better. I love this quote that um, convenience breeds isolation and inconvenience breeds pay for services and swipe, swipe, swipe. We don't have community. But at the base of the pyramid, when people don't have a lot, they don't have enough, they have to rely on the social network and interactions. So the strongest networks in the world, they're not here. They're not wealthy people playing together. The strongest networks in the world are right down here. Families, friends, communities that are growing up together. You look at immigrant communities all around the world. These groups stay together. They keep culture. They keep because they love spending time together, and it's part of who they are. I didn't grow up knowing what community was like in Canada. I learned that in the rest of the world. So, all of those of you that are thinking about creating network stakes, wanting to be a part of it, and wanting to think about creating the best possible network state, think about how to make it work for the most amount of people. And if you don't understand them, go and learn from them. Go spend a year in villages in the Philippines and don't like travel and bounce around and don't, stay in hostels. Go to a place and live there for 3 months and get to know it. Spend a year there, spend 2 years there. Help them solve their problems in real ways. One of the greatest gift I've had is that disaster response in the last 10 years is actually having been forced to not think about problems up here, but to actually deliver results down here on a complex environment. So for me, that was amazing training. It's not something that everyone can do or everyone would want to do, disaster response, but it's a great education on how to deliver. And yeah, if you want to know how the whole pyramid works, if you were born up here, spend a couple years or spend a year living on $1,000 a month or $500 a month in a developing country and learn how it works. You'll be able to bring so many ideas to the table. I guarantee it.
The question about disaster response and its different aspects of it, can you actually name core activities that any disaster response needed to be taken? Okay, if there is a tsunami coming in here, what do I do as a community organizer?
Sure. So first, I could address there's phases in a response, right? So you got two types of disasters. You got the ones that that are coming like a storm, and the ones that just happen like an earthquake, right? So you obviously, if you know something's coming, there's a whole bunch of things you do to get ready. If something just pops up, you just have to react. So that's the first point. So then you've got the incident that happens. Then you got the period of understanding, emergency response, trying to, get in there, and the most important thing is to understand what's needed and get the things in there that you assume are needed. Medical, depending on the severity of the disaster, depending on the information that's coming out, depending on the satellite imagery, depending on the predictions. We can make a lot of guesses about what's going to be required, but we don't really know until we reestablish communications. Now, that is where I think I can do the most innovation, is around that first 3 to 7 days. But that's a completely different conversation. So you've got that emergency response, which I'd say is 3 weeks long. And that's that full on, get everything in there. If there's an earthquake, you've got the search and rescue, urban search and rescue, life-saving activity in the first 72 hours. You got figuring out needs, delivering food, medical attention, and emergency shelter. Then you kind of have an early recovery phase, of another 3 to 6 months after that, where you're moving people out of tents and into more robust shelters. You're moving people out of shelters and into bunk houses or more transitional temporary shelters. You're starting the early recovery businesses getting going again, and then you've got the long term, reconstruction and rebuilding. So you've got multiple phases that you go through. Now, the UN has a whole system called the cluster coordination system that basically divides the different elements of the response into different coordination mechanisms. So you have a shelter cluster, a WASH, which is water and access to sanitation cluster. You got an information management group. And so we've got these different coordination mechanisms that occur. And there's the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, which helps orchestrate all of this coordination between all the big players. Now, that works well for the international community. That doesn't involve the governments very effectively. It doesn't involve the civil society and organic and informal movements very effectively. So there is a great coordinate, or I wouldn't call it great, but there is a coordination mechanism that exists for the big organizations, but it's slow. It's think about it as the big heavy lifters, right? It takes a while to ramp up, but like a train, takes a while for a train to get started, but once it starts, it's not stopping and will do what it needs to get done. The nimble fast responders don't have an effective coordination mechanism. So there's different elements that you have to think about, and most of the time what happens in a disaster is different groups think about different things. So Oxfam thinks about WASH. They build toilets. Red Cross and IOM and UNHCR, they focus on camp management and shelter. WFP focuses on food, et cetera, et cetera. So everyone has their different mechanisms. But what they don't really do well is bring it all together. And I would suggest that is a huge area of innovation for us over the next few years. And that's part of my disaster response plan and vision, is how do we get the regenerative and permaculture communities, the people who think holistically, to bring together the best ideas and solutions and contribute to the rebuilding effort. Because the UN has all the money and heavy lifting, but they don't have the knowledge and the nimbleness that exists in like the regen community that exists in the Web3 world. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to bring together crypto and Web3 with big humanitarian organizations that are very slow, with innovative, nimble, organic responses and informal responses.
Thank you.
I